Welcome to the Safety Map podcast. I'm Alyssa Decker, founder and developer of the Safety Map framework, and this is where we talk about how safety, not performance, is the foundation of healing. We're talking about healing that goes beyond coping skills and into structural change. I'm so glad you're here. Your children are not just learning behavior. They are building safety maps. Most of us think that our job as parents is to teach our kids proper behavior, to help them learn how to act in socially responsible ways, to show up at work, to defend those who need defending. And all of that may be true. But underneath it all, what matters most is how your child is building their safety map. But underneath it all, what matters most is how your child's safety map is developing. Every interaction that we have with our children helps to teach their nervous systems what communication feels like, what conflict means, what happens when emotions appear, when they're safe and when they're not, whether honesty is survivable, whether their mistakes threaten belonging, whether their needs create burdens, whether repair is possible, how they interpret pressure, and so much more. That is what we're talking about on today's episode of the Safety Map podcast. Hey, Alyssa here. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Safety Map podcast. If you are enjoying this content, if you're learning something here, or even just identifying with what we've been talking about, please take a moment to subscribe or follow on whatever platform you're currently listening in on. This really helps other people find the content, and it makes sure that you don't miss a single upcoming episode. Thank you so much. Now back to today's episode. One of the biggest mistakes that we make in parenting our children is assuming that they are primarily learning behavior. They're not. However, I will also say their behavior often makes much more sense than we experience or than we feel like it does as parents. Children are actively learning every single day what relationships feel like, what emotions mean, what anger means, what conflict feels like, whether conflict is safe, the cost of honesty, what happens when they disappoint someone. In other words, they are actively constructing safety maps. And most parenting advice, most parenting books focus primarily on behavior management. Behavior, however, is only the surface. You've heard me say many times that threat prediction organizes behavior. So we can work with our child's behavior and find ourselves confused and frustrated when their behavior does not align with what we have so consistently and with so much effort tried to teach them. Why? Because their threat prediction is organizing their behavior in a way that is safety seeking. This is just as true for your children as it is for us as adults. In fact, children's behavior is very often protective before it is oppositional. Your child is likely not being intentionally defiant of your taught behavior, or even defiant of your behavior modification strategies, your attempts to teach them to behave better. They are more likely using that behavior as a safety-seeking strategy, which is why sometimes the chore charts with the stickers and the gold stars for good behavior and the allowance that they get if their attitude is good, all of that often fails because the threat prediction and the safety-seeking is louder. Your child's behavior makes sense through the lens of threat prediction and safety seeking. Things like meltdowns, lying, avoidance, arguing, shutting down, slamming doors, clinging, perfectionism, aggression, not listening, emotional explosions, all of those things can be organized by threat prediction. They are not random. No behavior, no matter how absurd, obscene, or frustrating, is random. But this does not mean that all behavior is acceptable. Okay? I don't want you to hear me say that your child's behavior should be tolerated or accepted simply because it is organized in a way that is safety seeking. Understanding the protection is not the same thing as removing boundaries. Okay? So what does that look like practically? What's going on and how do we balance our children's development of safety maps, their new threat predictions, all of the safety strategies that their body is experimenting with our expectations of their behavior and the socially acceptable behavior that they need to learn? Okay, well, first, it's important to understand that children do not learn safety through words. They do not feel safe simply because we tell them they're safe. They don't feel loved simply because we tell them that they are loved. Now, words matter, but experience matters more. Your child is encoding on their safety map constantly the reality of their felt experience. What happened when I fell down? What happens when I cry? What happens when I yell? When I throw a tantrum? Who stays with me and who leaves me? How can I safely express anger without disconnection? What happens when you need space or get angry? What happens when mom and dad get overwhelmed? Every behavior from a child, every action that they take, they are learning these things from. It can be something as simple as, what happens when I hide my broccoli in the trash and mom finds it, versus I hide my broccoli in the trash and my big sister finds it. Every experience is encoding in your child's safety map what is safe, what is not, what keeps me connected, what leads to disconnection. Children do not build safety primarily through information or through words. They build it and they understand it through repeated nervous system experience. In episode 11, I talked about how pressure tightens systems. And this is true of children too. Children's systems also tighten under pressure. When children experience repeated lectures, threats, shame, interrogation, escalating tone, forced eye contact, public embarrassment, questions like, why would you do that? Or, you know better than that. The reaction from your child's nervous system is a protective strategy. They feel the pressure. They experience the shame or the disconnection, and their safety maps organize defensive behavior. You may have seen this in your child. A child who feels cornered will usually protect before they engage. Cornered children, angry children, frustrated children are very rarely capable of safe and open and calm communication. They are organized almost entirely around defense at that point. And parents often, no judgment here, I have totally been there. We often mistake this defensive behavior as defiance. We often think that the child is defying us when in fact they might simply be trying to figure out what is safe. How do I stay connected? How can I continue to belong here? Now, I have 5 kids, and so I have a whole range of personalities. I have 2 that are very much on the strong-willed, outspoken, outgoing, seemingly defiant end of the spectrum. I have 2 that are on the very compliant, will do anything I tell them to do. And I have 1 that is in the middle. He can sometimes go either way depending on who's around to influence his behavior. But what I have learned, both in my work as a practitioner and as a mother, is that compliance is often not the same thing as willing obedience. Children can and do very much adapt to their surroundings. And if a child learns that getting perfect grades or over apologizing or remaining quiet and in the background is their best and safest path to remain connected, that is exactly what they will do. Children will often comply while still feeling deeply unsafe because they are using that compliance to negotiate safety. So calm behavior in a child is not always a calm nervous system. I have very much found this to be true in my children who are a little bit more compliant or a little more passive. I have to be exceptionally careful as a mother that I am aware of times when they may be using compliance to seek safety rather than complying because they agree. Some children become aggressive under pressure. Now, that is more frustrating in many ways. It can be more activating for us as a parent, but it's often easier to spot, right? We can often understand how that aggression is protection and safety seeking and learning and testing behavior rather than simply being defiant. Both of those, the compliance and the aggression, can be protection strategies. They can be safety-seeking patterns that your child is forming as they learn how to maintain belonging. Now, here's the thing, okay? We often, as parents, and I am completely guilty of this as well, we often mistake our children's compliance with evidence that we are parenting well. And we often mistake their aggression or their misbehavior as evidence that we are failing. Children's behavior often organizes our own threat predictions and our own safety-seeking patterns. So our children's behavior may trigger a lot of things in us, anything from failure or helplessness or judgment or loss of control or fear for the future or disrespect or rejection. And that can be a lot to deal with as a parent. When we have a child whose behavior constantly triggers our own threat predictions, this can get really tough. Because our behavior becomes organized by our own threat predictions. And sometimes we find ourselves responding to our children in ways that we wish we never would have done, that we never planned to do, and that we felt in the moment was completely out of our control. We go to the worst case scenario when our threat predictions are activated. We make a messy room mean that they are never going to survive adulthood. or the fact that they haven't learned how to load the dishwasher properly after 47,000 explanations to mean that they will never be successful in any career ever. We take a little back talk and somehow we make it mean that we are losing our authority, or we're being disrespected, or we're failing miserably as parents. Sometimes what's really happening is that their safety map, as it is learning and testing and exploring, is colliding with ours. So what do we do? How do we fix it? How do we end the cycle? How do we create conditions in which our children's safety maps can truly encode safety so that our children can develop healthy protective patterns rather than ones that are going to cause them problems throughout their lives? Well, the first step is to do your own work. If you find your child's behavior activating your own defensive behavior, then maybe it's time to start doing some investigation, to start working on your own nervous system repair. The next thing we can do is work to maintain a posture of curiosity when we are engaging with our children, especially at the moments when they are the most activated and the most defensive. Now, curiosity is not the same as permissiveness, okay? Curiosity asks, why is this happening? What are they protecting? What activated their threat prediction? What does this child need help learning? What skills do they need? What skills are they missing? What prediction might be operating here? And how can I, as a parent, respond in a way that maintains safety? Curiosity helps us respond to the nervous system beneath the behavior, and not just the behavior itself. Curiosity, like I said, it does not negate the need for correction or discipline sometimes, right? And it is possible, especially when we are not acting from a defensive state, but rather from a state of curiosity, to say, oh, help me understand what happened. Or, oh, I see what happened there. I understand why your system is using this behavior to help keep you safe. Let's talk about that. Let me demonstrate to you that you're safe with me, that we can stay connected. And you can still experience the consequences of your actions. Discipline and curiosity can coexist. And in fact, discipline is much more effective when it is combined with curiosity, because your child can receive and understand and respond to your correction in a much more open way, in a much more receptive way, when they feel safe, when they understand that their behavior did not disconnect them from you. Now, I do not always do this perfectly, but here are some things that I have learned and try to practice in my parenting with my kids. Instead of asking questions like, why did you do that? I ask questions like this. What felt hard about that? What did your body want to do just then? What happened right before this? Right? Right before you ran upstairs and slammed the door. What did you feel in your body? What were you afraid would happen if you told me the truth? What were you afraid might happen if you stayed instead of running away and slamming the door? These kinds of questions can demonstrate to our children that we are with them, that we are for them, that their behavior, while perhaps inappropriate, is not going to lead to disconnection with us. What this looks like in my house is often we ask these questions, we have these conversations, and there is still a consequence for the behavior. The consequence does not go away. Now, I do try to rely on naturally occurring consequences as often as possible. Sometimes just letting cause and effect take place in parenting is a beautiful thing. But what I want you to remember most is that what matters more than perfect parenting, what matters far more than getting it all right, is repair. It's safety. It's we can stay connected and in relationship, and you can still belong here even when I am not pleased with your behavior, even when you do something that hurts me, even when you don't comply with what I've asked you to do. Children do not need perfectly regulated parents, and thank goodness for that. My children do not have a perfectly regulated parent. But what they need is repair, accountability, honesty, reconnection, predictability, and emotional access, emotional survivability. Children learn safety not because conflict never happens, not because activation never happens, but because the connection survives the conflict repeatedly. This is what leads to securely attached kids. And this is what leads to children who grow into adults with healthy, safety-seeking behaviors. Your child's behavior is telling a story, and it's not about discipline, and it's not about personality. It is about what their nervous system has learned to predict about safety, connection, emotion, and belonging. Children are not just learning how to behave. They are learning who they are allowed to be while staying connected to people they love. If this is something you would like support with, my email address is in the show notes below. And if you haven't already, make sure you download Calm is Not the Same as Safety. This PDF is designed to be your very first introduction or your first steps into understanding threat prediction, perceived safety, and how your system organizes behavior in an attempt to stay safe. That link is also below in the show notes. Before you go, I'd love it if you shared this episode with a friend or a family member who could also benefit from this information. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time in the next episode of the Safety Map Podcast.